I've just got a new Samsung Note20 Ultra, and in this video I'm going to investigate how good its cameras are for shooting video. According to the specs, the device has one front-facing camera and 3 rear-facing cameras. You can see that the camera block really protrudes from the back of the phone here, and compare that to my old Samsung S9, which is virtually flat. The front-facing camera is a 10 megapixel wide angle with an 80-degree field of view and an aperture of f2.2. The rear cameras are a 12 megapixel ultra wide with a 120-degree field of view and aperture of f2.2 again. The standard lens is a 108 megapixel regular wide angle with a 79-degree field of view and an aperture of f1.8. And this camera also has a 1/1.33 inch image sensor size, which is the same as the main camera sensor in the Galaxy S20 Ultra. The third lens is a 12 megapixel telephoto with an aperture of f3.0. And this lens gives you up to 5 times optical zoom, what Samsung calls space zoom. And beyond the optical, you can get up to 50 times zoom, but only when shooting stills. When shooting video, the native camera app offers you up to 20 times zoom. There's also a laser autofocus sensor here, and Samsung says the laser AF sensor is used to enhance the AF performance in close range and low light environments. The problem is those 108 megapixels have to be squeezed onto this sensor, and that means small pixels. And small pixels can mean poorer low light performance. So the strategy is that in low light situations, the 108 megapixel sensor will combine neighboring pixels to create bigger pixels and then grab more light. The Samsung Note20 Ultra is HDR10+ certified, but most of their recent devices have this, so it's nothing special for this phone in particular. Yes, this device will record and play back HDR10+, but then so does my old S9. Like with other recent Samsung flagship smartphones, the Note20 Ultra can shoot 8K video. And bear in mind, you are limited to 24 frames per second only when shooting 8K. Otherwise, the device can shoot 4K video at up to 60 frames per second. The same as last year's Note 10 and S10 range. There's also slow motion at 240 frames per second at 1080p, and super slow motion at a kind of crazy 960 frames per second, but that's limited to 720p. So Samsung recently brought back Pro mode for video and for still photos. And this means you can get great manual control without using a third-party app. To access Pro mode, you need to go into the camera options and look through a list of choices. There's full control for focus, ISO, shutter speed, and so on. And Pro mode even gives you focus peaking, this kind of green outline, to help you get a nice sharp focus. Let's talk about the telephoto lens in this device. So this is the first time I've owned a smartphone with a dedicated telephoto lens, and I'm curious to find out how useful it really is. So the first thing I tested was Pro mode, because as a videographer, I really want to use manual control. I want to set shutter speed, I want to set focus, and ideally I want to switch between these lenses. But there's no way to access the 3 lenses directly. All you can do is scroll up to this top icon labeled zoom. And when you tap this, you get a plus and minus slider. Now in Pro mode, the lowest it can go is 1 times, and the highest it can go is 10 times. Now you would think it would be using the device's dedicated telephoto lens to capture a telephoto shot, but incredibly, when I put my finger over the tele lens, it reveals that the device is not using it. Therefore, in Pro mode, the device is only using the rather unprofessional digital zoom, which produces this rather poor quality video. It also does not allow you to use the ultra-wide-angle lens, which is why the slider doesn't let you zoom out further than 1 times. So in fact, Pro Video Mode only allows you to use the standard wide lens, this one in the middle, but these two either side are out of bounds when using Pro Mode. So that's really quite a strange decision by Samsung. One excuse might be that the ultra-wide has a fixed focus and would therefore conflict with Pro Mode manual controls, but that doesn't explain why we can't use the telephoto in Pro Mode, because ideally in Pro Mode there would be a telephoto lens button to switch to that lens and give yourself a 5 times optical zoom. And that would be what I consider a pro feature. But to have this lens sitting in your phone and not be able to switch to it, when you're in Pro Mode at least, is pretty frustrating. Once you switch to auto mode, the Note20 Ultra now accesses all 3 lenses. In regular video mode of the native app, you get these 3 icons which control the zoom. Each one of these icons is basically a button to switch lenses. So if you tap the one big leaf icon at the top, it zooms in to 5 times, which is the limit of the optical zoom. And if I place my finger over the telephoto lens, you can see that it's now actually using that lens. And that's why you get this much better quality, because it's using a lens to zoom in. It's not zooming in using the sensor. And if I tap the 2 trees icon, I get the middle standard lens, the one in the middle of these 3 lenses. And if I tap the icon with the 3 trees, it zooms out to use the ultra-wide angle 0.5 times lens. The great thing about using these zoom icons in regular video mode is you can tap them while you're recording. You don't need to stop and change the zoom level and then start again. So it's great for spontaneous video shooting on the fly. One thing that's really nice is the way the autofocus changes. It's fast and accurate, but smooth as well, and this is very slick to my eyes. So when I move the direction of the camera just a little, the focus switches from the flower in the foreground to the bush behind it. But it does so smoothly, and that's very usable. As a filmmaker, this smooth change of focus is very nice. It's a very nice quality to it. Even with many top DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, you will see the autofocus hunting around, or you can see it breathing, so the image is distorted as it moves. But this is really nice. FiLMiC Pro seems to work fine with the Note20 Ultra. Again, there's no access to the telephoto lens, and I know third-party app developers are not given access. But that's no surprise, as it seems Samsung's own Pro Mode app developers don't even have access to it, so you wouldn't expect third-party app developers to get it either. Now, when you choose the ultra-wide lens, you can see that you can't adjust the focus. The focus reticle is fixed, but you can still adjust shutter speed and ISO and so on. So at least when using a third-party app, you do get to use 2 of these lenses. Most recent Samsung devices, I'm talking about the last 3 or 4 years, can shoot and playback HDR10+. The Note20 Ultra is of course included. For those of us who want to shoot the best possible video with our smartphones, either for social media or filmmaking, or anything maybe work related, we are sort of heading in 2 directions. One of those directions is HDR10+, which is metadata attached to the video adjusting parts of the image to increase dynamic range. For example, the software will tone down the sky so it doesn't blow out and you get this more richer, bluer look. And it will also boost the shadow areas to show more detail in the shadows. And Apple have recently introduced Dolby Vision to their iPhone 12 range, but they have been using dynamic tone remapping in the camera software for video for a number of years already. And the second direction is manual control. So like when using FiLMiC Pro or Pro Mode in your Samsung device. If we take this direction, we get to control shutter speed and ISO and focus and all the rest of it. But now, here's the problem. HDR10+, Dolby Vision and dynamic tone remapping do not work with manual control. They conflict, because with manual control you're trying to fix everything in place. But with these new technologies for enhancing the dynamic range, they're adjusting different parts of the image in real time, which is why when shooting with an iPhone and FiLMiC Pro, you sometimes get this flickering sky effect. or the tone remapping overrides the locked exposure and adjusts the exposure anyway. And this is something Steven Soderbergh complained about when shooting a high-flying bird with an iPhone 8 Plus, and perhaps why he's never made another movie with an iPhone. So let's look at the difference. The good thing about Android devices is they allow third-party apps to switch off HDR and HDR10+. In FiLMiC Pro, if you switch on HDR, it tells you that you now have zero control over manual settings. But at least you can turn it off. With iPhones, you cannot turn off dynamic tone remapping. And so you always get this conflict going on, especially in low light conditions. So I took a few shots to compare shooting with manual control over using the Samsung native app, but not Pro mode. And you can see that when I'm using the native app in auto mode, the HDR10 Plus kicks in and creates a more dynamic range, more vibrant colors. Now compare this to the same shot using FiLMiC Pro and HDR switched off. Now I get to control my camera settings, but I lose all that dynamic range. You can see the sky is more blown out and the trees are darker. There's less detail in the shadows. Now, as a filmmaker, I'm in two minds about what is best. With manual control, I get to control my camera like it's a DSLR, but when shooting with the native app in auto, I get this rich color and dynamic range right out of the box. You don't need to do anything to enhance the colors or tones because the phone is doing it all for you. Plus, with my Note20 Ultra, I now get to switch between the three lenses. So that's really a bit of a difficult decision now for us to make. The longer this goes on with companies like Samsung and Apple developing their HDR10 Plus or Dolby Vision and the dynamic tone remapping, it becomes more of a kind of feature of shooting with your smartphone. You're going to get more and more dynamic range. It's going to get better at doing this. It means that you just shoot video and the software is doing the work for you. But on the other hand, you don't get the control. So when you're moving the camera around or when objects are moving within the frame, there's going to be adjustments to exposure, which is traditionally something that we consider to be unprofessional and messy. So it's really quite a difficult decision now. I went out to shoot just to get some tests and I had a lot of fun just shooting most of the time with the auto app so that I could get to use this telephoto lens and try out moving the camera slightly just to see this change in focus. The autofocus is really nice as well, and that's something that you won't get if you're using FiLMiC Pro or the Pro mode or another third-party app. So I guess it's there's creative choices to be made there. And I personally am in two minds about, if I shot another short film, I don't know if I would always use FiLMiC Pro now or another third-party app, because we'd be losing that extra dynamic range, this extra vibrancy in the colors. And then you have to try and put that back when color grading, and smartphone video just doesn't take too much grading. And of course it's a lot of extra work. So what do we do? What do we decide? Well, at least with Android, we do have the option to switch it off if we want that manual control. So that's another plus point for using a Samsung or another Android device over iPhone. iPhone is definitely going in the direction of software-controlled cameras. And with Apple, we know that they don't like to let other people mess with how their devices work. Anyway, so that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please like the video, and if you haven't done so already, much appreciate any kind of subscription. Add yourself to subscribe and you'll get more videos from me, and I'll see you in the next video.